The Maledicted, a Discovery of Daemons and Demons. Written and narrated by RHOOK. Produced and published by Phantasmagoria Publishing. Welcome to the world of the Maledicted Series, a realm where magic, desire, and danger intertwine. Prepare yourself for an enthralling journey filled with demons, and the tantalizing allure of forbidden romance. Shall we begin? Arrivals. "Don't let go," she whispered to him. "Kiss me," he whispered back. His eyes low and locked onto hers. Wind rushed round their heads, making it hard to hear anything. Yet they heard one another as clearly as if they spoke the words directly to their souls. She obeyed him earnestly. The wind picked up, and they broke their embrace to regard the clouds below. A hurricane swirled as they glided above its eye. They were higher than they were just moments ago. Their clothes soaked through. He didn't remember passing through the storm. They looked up to see the stars above them. She reached out and above with her thumb and forefinger, as if to pluck a star out of the darkness, as one would pick a berry from a bush. The sun began to break over the curvature of the earth, and their bodies absorbed its intense, nourishing touch. At that altitude he imagined they would explode into flames, like so many satellites and shuttlecraft. They only continued to float there. You were wearing a sundress, weren't you? Their bodies, their skin exposed to the elements. They were nude then, hovering between heaven and earth. Their eyes met again. They kissed again. She smelled of the sea, Caribbean. He knew, but didn't know how. Her legs slid up his thighs and folded around his hips. They floated for some time, making love all the while. "Hold me tight, don't let go." She tapped him on the shoulder, whispered in his ear. The stars above him began to explode into supernovas all around him, filling space above them with reds and pinks and purples. The next thing Premier knew, he was staring into a bright light, his eyelids heavy and almost closed. He saw mostly red, pink, purple, and white. His attention went to his right. He was being tapped on the shoulder by a gorgeous, dark-skinned flight attendant. He missed the first part of her sentence. All he heard was "seatbelt." He looked down at his crotch, and he covered it immediately. He was visibly erect and instantly embarrassed. His eyes widened as he looked back at the attractive flight attendant, begging her forgiveness. If she noticed at all, she didn't show it. She simply repeated herself, speaking English in a melodic Creole accent. "We're approaching for landing. Please fasten your seatbelt." Positive he was awake and understood her. She winked, smiling all the while, and proceeded to secure the rest of the plane's passengers. He breathed deeply in his window set, collected himself. He looked out of the window. The tropical storm was roaring. He had been dreaming that same dream again. "Fuck, that's the last time I eat an edible before a flight," he thought. But lately, having an indica-infused edible has been about the only way he could sleep through the night. This worked for a while, but the trade-off was he would sleep through the night, but the dream occasionally hits him harder, is more intense, more vivid. But when he woke, the dream, sometimes nightmare, would be a fog in his mind, but yet he felt refreshed. He landed in Haiti later that same day, excited to take in its energy. He had been in contact with a family member online, but thought he'd surprise them before checking into his hotel. On the street then, after making it through customs and then security, Premier hops aboard a parked tap-tap and shouts the direction he's headed in to the driver. The driver nodded in acknowledgement. Just then a middle-aged woman carrying a large waxed rice bag struggled to climb into the modified pickup truck turned taxi. Premier gallantly helped her aboard. A few more passengers climb in, and Premier, familiar with tradition, shouts to the driver to go. "Allez," he shouted, and wrapped an open palm on the outside of the taxi. The driver took off onto the countryside, a long ride southbound on mostly dirt roads. Premier produced his smartphone discreetly and sent a half-flirty message to the fashion model / fashion influencer / fashion designer that hired him to be the photographer for her clothing line's new campaign. He let her know he had landed safely. She replied gleefully. He was more than aware it wasn't a good idea to flirt with a client. Hey, she started it, was his defense when he thought about it, sending him private messages on social media littered with heart and lip emojis. She was a tad bit younger than he, so he figured it was just the way she communicated and thought nothing of it, until she started sending him half-nude images, then fairly nude images, then just plain nude images. They were tastefully done and artful boudoir, though. The flurry of flesh-filled photos were followed with a text, for reference purposes only. She was a long-legged, fair-skinned woman of some African descent. Her mocha complexion, hazel green eyes, and dirty blonde hair gave away her mulatto heritage. That and her Franco-German last name, she obviously came from money. Going to have to tread carefully with this one, he told himself. He would be shooting her in a bathing suit on one of Haiti's most beautiful beaches, so she thought it would help if he knew exactly what she looked like. He wasn't sure at first if he should reciprocate her indirect, yet not so subtle advances, until she video chatted him wearing nothing but a towel. He asked if he caught her at a bad time, though she was the one that called him. "No, it's fine," she said. "You're going to see me naked soon anyway." She winked, her lips slanted into a cheeky smirk. He knew she was half teasing, half flirting, but he still wasn't sure then how serious she was about them having sex, or if that was even something on her mind. In his line of work, it was not uncommon to meet men and women that were completely unabashed by the nude human body. "I've been so naked in front of so many people, I just stopped caring. I can't even process it anymore," a model said to him once when he asked if she was comfortable. He once witnessed the same model eating lunch with the entire production crew, wearing nothing but makeup, with her legs crossed, of course. He always thought highly of her. Even while she was as naked as a peeled peach, she was still a lady. If you're seasoned in this game, it's just part of the job. At that point, he figured it wouldn't hurt to just play along. He'd find out how serious she was, if at all, once they met in person. They spoke for hours that night, strategizing the upcoming shoot. The photo shoot would span a few days. After he landed, he'd spend some time scouting the locations. She wanted to meet him at the airport, but he declined. He needed to explore a bit on his own. He didn't want the experience clouded by work. He also planned on seeing his cousin later, before checking into his hotel room, and thought it might be awkward to have his client there. This was his first international contract as a professional photographer, and he wanted to do a good job, but he also wanted to enjoy his time in the country where he was born. He was a kid when he left, so he did not know much about the country firsthand, only what his mother had told him, which wasn't much. He imagined life on the island was hard for her, and so she chose to forget and for him not to know. He only knew what he read online and what he saw on his cousin's social media timeline. Haiti's full cultural experience does not translate well over the internet, however. Culture, especially Caribbean culture, is best consumed tangibly. Recalling the conversation a week or so earlier, he'd spend the first day or two sightseeing and visiting family he'd met online. Then he would spend half a day scouting locations for the shoot. He would have lunch with the client, then they would meet with the rest of the crew and start the first night of studio shots that would go into lookbooks and catalogs. Day 2 of shooting would consist of location shots. Time permitting, they'd shoot on Jacmel Beach in the morning, then at a nearby resort in the evening after the crew broke for lunch. "My crew is tight too," she proclaimed. "My MUA." That's mostly how she spoke. In acronyms, pretty is a beast. Wait, that's her real name? He had to interrupt. There's no way that's her real name. Yep, that's her real name. OMG, I know, right? So cute. I checked her ID myself. She was like destined to be an MUA. I love her. You're going to love her too. She's so sweet. She reminded him of the Valley girls he dated in Los Angeles. He had mixed feelings about meeting her in a few days. Miles later, Premier wrapped his open palm on the outside of the tap-tap, and the driver stopped to let him and any other passengers step out. Premier pays his fare and discreetly palms the driver a generous tip. He had to be careful how much of his wealth he shared, however. Haiti, wealthy in culture, wealthy in delicious cuisine, a wealth of beautiful beaches, a wealth of beautiful people, has little economic wealth. More pointedly, the economic wealth it does have is possessed by a very small part of the population, a handful of businessmen, politicians, and old guard families that work together to control the flow of Haiti's wealth, keeping their wealth and power concentrated to their circle, and leaving the rest of the island to fend for themselves. And so one has to be mindful that even the closest of friends may have an eye on just how much wealth you might have. Rumors of robbers, killers, kidnappers, and ransomers are more than just rumor. It's a fact of life on the island, no more or no less a force of nature than an earthquake or a hurricane. That was in the city, though, as far as Premier knew. Not in the countryside where his family was from. A healthily populated village near Jacmel, with the sun setting on the day he makes his way to his cousin's home. Surprised to see him, his cousin Jean almost couldn't believe his cousin was standing in front of him. They stared at each other for a beat. Premier, Pukisa ou pas di moun ou tap vini, Jean shouted in Creole, but then, as if remembering his cousin wasn't fluent in Creole, switched to English. How did you even know where we lived? Are you here with your mother? That last question stung a little. He and his mother hadn't been very close in the last few years after he left home, against her wishes. You sent me your address a few months ago. You said to come by whenever I was in town, so here I am in town, Premier replied, avoiding the last question. Jean embraced his cousin in a big, hearty, back-slapping hug. So happy to see you, man. I didn't think you would ever visit, though, Jean teased. So really, what are you doing in town? I can't come to see my cousin, Premier said with a wry smile. Yea, right, Jean eyed his cousin in mock suspicion. Either way, I'm happy to see you, man. Happy to see you, too. Kids, Jean shouted at his home. Your cousin Premier is here. In the next moment, Jean's 5 children come rushing out of the home and all but tackle Premier to the ground. Hi, cousin, said a tiny child with a bright white smile that was almost as bright as the whites of his eyes. Hi, cousin. Another big bright smile, though maybe not as bright, as this child was missing a few of her teeth. Cousin. Yet another child who was bigger than the rest hugged him with a surprising strength that some children possess. She seemed to him no older than a teenager, but was definitely older than her siblings. Mr. Cousin. Hi, a chubby toddler squealed before placing a pacifier back into her face. The last child didn't say much, only giggled sporadically as she held tightly to Premier's leg. Premier, almost falling, but simultaneously propped up by the gang of children, laughed and returned their embrace. He'd only just met them, and they had only just met him, yet they were already fast friends. Hey guys, I brought you something. They unpiled from Premier and helped him to steady himself. Cousin, Premier, what did you bring me? Said the bear hugger. A girl with bright, big upturned eyes. Premier thought she looked something like a cat. Oh, he exclaimed with a perfect Creole accent. It felt good to be among his people. Felt good to speak his mother tongue again, to speak his language to his people. He then found himself at a loss for words, didn't know what to say next. He realized short of his cousin, he knows none of their names. Oh. His cousin must have caught on and put Premier out of his misery. Redline, UPA won't. Premier hadn't heard anyone say that in years. The last time he heard that was when his mother scolded him for bringing home a girlfriend she didn't approve of. She didn't approve of any. Have you no shame? The words translated in his head in real time. It pained him that Creole was not his first language. Pardon my rude children, cousin. This is Redline. He pointed to the eldest girl with the big, bright, cat-like eyes. Redmond, the eldest boy with the big, bright smile. Renaud, the youngest boy. Raven, the girl that was a few teeth shy of a perfect smile. And Robin, his youngest girl, the toddler, suckling a pacifier. Redline smiled in embarrassment and looked at her father, knowing he had taught her better than the manners she had displayed. Premier winked at her and produced a large book. She frowned. Don't worry, the only words are on the cover. It's full of pretty pictures I think you'll like. She beamed again and grabbed the book and hugged him again. She ran back into her home. The other children didn't move. They all eyed him with expecting eyes, the younger of the bunch with expecting hands. Premier, having done his homework, produced a toy or treat for each of the children. He beamed as they followed Red Lane into the home. I'm really happy you're here, Prem, Jean confesses to his cousin. Me too, Jean. Where are you staying? My hotel is not far from here, maybe an hour or so. He made a gesture with his chin, pointing to the south. I really wish you would have said you were coming. I would have had Safrina cook you a meal you'd not soon forget. He sensed he may have made a mistake surprising Jean and his family the way he did. I bet, he said, holding back his insecurity about the predicament he put his cousin in. Safrina was a formally trained chef. She developed menus for most of the reputable resorts in and around Sud Arrondissements, the southernmost district of Haiti. I'm still trying to get over the fact that she cooked for the president and his family. Listen, if her food is that good, if and when you die, I'm marring her next, I promise you. He said in a manner that he intended to come off as half serious. Oh, as long as you treat her and all of my kids right. As a matter of fact, you can take the kids with you now, as practice. The men laughed heartily. Speaking of, man, you've been busy. Do you let her sleep? Or is it the other way around? He playfully elbowed his cousin in the ribs. Man, listen, her food makes me want to make babies, if you know what I mean. What can I say? They laughed, hugging each other's shoulders. Jean, qui is au Genyen la? A woman shouts from the second floor of the home. The children almost reply in unison. Cousin Premiere. Oh, cousin who? A moment later, with a dress so short it would easily be considered inappropriate in cultures where the climate was more temperate, house slippers and a warm smile, she came hopping down the front steps of the home to greet Premiere. Premiere, this is my wife, Safrina. Later, both Premiere and Jean were twisting the tops off of prestige beers. Jean grabs another beer from the fridge as Safrina takes a seat at their dining room table across from Premiere. Oh my God, why didn't you tell me you were coming? I would have made you something to eat. Before he could answer, she took a sip of her beer and rushed out of her seat as though she had just remembered something, and before anyone knew it, she was gathering ingredients. What are you doing in town? She queried as she collected a few pots, intent on staying engaged in the conversation, as she warmed up leftovers. I'm here for a photo shoot, said Premiere between sips of crisp cold beer. Safrina placed a bowl of fried plantains with a smaller bowl of fermented peppered cabbage and carrots, followed by a large bowl of rice and a large serving platter of grilled chicken. She called for her eldest child to put down the photo book Premiere had given them, and helped to plate the table. The other children filed in to help. When they were done plating and all the adults and children were seated at the table, they all bowed their heads and Jean laid the table with a prayer. It had been a long time since Premiere had prayed at dinner. It caught him off guard. Our Lord, we thank you for providing for us, for blessing us with this delicious food. We thank you for our family, for bringing Premiere home safely, for protecting him and our family from demons that might do us harm. Jean's last statement confused Premiere. He had not known much about Jean, but he didn't think him a true believer. That was a little much, he thought. We thank you, Lord, for we are humbled and blessed by your favor. Amen. Amen, they all replied together. After dinner, after Safrina and Jean ushered the children to bed, Premiere began collecting his things and thought to make his way out after wishing everyone a good night, until he remembered he didn't have a car, and that he'd been drinking, and that rideshare apps weren't really a thing in that town. You can sleep in the guest room. Jean, holding the last of his beer. He had to have known his cousin lost track of time. It's best you spend the night. I'd give you a ride to the hotel, but... He held up his third half-empty bottle of Prestige. Premiere, I'm glad you're here. It feels right. Stay a while if you can. Don't leave so soon. Sure, cousin. I can hang out for a week or more after this shoot. I got nothing else planned. Good, good. That's great. Got some things I'd like to talk to you about. He paused for a long beat. God bless you. Have a good night, cousin. Premier wasn't really sure how to respond to that. He was not a religious man. Good night, Jean, was all he could think to say. That night he slept better than he had in years. The sometimes recurring nightmare he would experience had passed him by that night. He just slept. No dreams, no nightmare even. A peaceful sleep. He woke to the smell of authentic homegrown coffee. It was a raw, rich, dark, sweet aroma that permeated the home. He rose from the bed, slipped on a robe, and made his way to the kitchen where he knew he would find Safrina. He found both Jean and Safrina moving about the kitchen in an almost choreographed fashion. Good morning, Premier. Have a seat. Safrina will fix you a plate, he said without missing a beat, as he cleared used plates and silverware from the table and piled them into a large farm-style kitchen sink. You guys ate without me. Oh, this ain't America, city boy. Around here we rise before the sun and the chickens, Safrina said. Jane added, You looked like you needed the sleep, cousin. He locked eyes with Premier for a beat. It's a school day. I know a self-made guy like yourself may not necessarily keep in mind what day of the week it is. Jean winked at his cousin. Premier sat. Jean placed a cup of coffee on the table. Premier held the cup to his nose and took in the aroma. He smiled brightly and felt as though he was in a commercial. He took a few sips and was immediately brought back in time. The coffee was spiced with cinnamon and cayenne pepper, softened with milk and sweetened with honey. The flavors roused his taste buds, electrified his mind. His eyes opened wide, and before he knew it, an audible left his lips. He noticed the stares from Jean and Safrina. It's been a while. My mother used to make it for me every weekend. Haven't been home for a while, though. He felt truly like he had just auditioned for a commercial. Safrina, you call me the moment this fool messes up and I'll come running. For coffee like this every day? He winked at his cousin. I appreciate that, but Jean made the coffee, so if you two want to go and get married right now. She winked at Premier, slapped her husband on the butt, and added, I could use the break. They all laughed. Jean, if we weren't cousins. Premier took another sip of coffee. Fuck it. I don't care if we are cousins. This coffee is amazing. Run away with me. Hey, replied Jean. You're not my type. Safrina placed a plate of food in front of him. Eggs and grits molded into the shape of a dome. Atop the dome were seasoned shrimps placed in a meticulously artisan fashion. Along one side of the dome were a few pieces of fried plantains, fanned out, minced scallions and cilantro scattered about. This is the most beautiful breakfast I've had in years. I almost can't eat it, thank you. Before either Jean or Safrina could reply, Premier was devouring the meal. What? He said with a wry look on his face. I said almost. What do you have planned today, cousin? Asked Jean. Premier, who by then had finished his breakfast and was nursing his coffee, replied, Not much. Just going to rent a motorcycle and check out a few locations for the photo shoot. What do you guys have planned? Well, we figured you would be doing something like that. Safrina took the day off, and I didn't have much planned anyway. Mind if we tag along? Replied Jean as he finished drying the last of the dishes. Premier beamed. He realized how being in Haiti with his family was beginning to bring out the inner child in him. He brushed off the feeling. Hell no, I don't mind. He was a little disappointed he'd have to forgo the motorcycle ride, though. You know, I have my bike right. As if reading Premier's mind. He'd seen photos of the bike on his cousin's social media profile. His eyes widened. Like a child, he leapt from his seat. Where is it? Chirped Safrina. Let's get ready to go. You two children can play with toys when we get back. We need to be home before it gets too dark. With that command, Safrina began to make her way upstairs. Both men curbed their enthusiasm. Okay, said Premier, deflated. Yes, love, replied Jean robotically. like a married man practicing the art of love and war that is marriage. Premier started for the guest room when Jean grabbed him by the arm and briskly walked him into the garage where his motorbike sat retired under a well-worn tarp used as a dust cover. He quickly pulled off the tarp and they admired the bike briefly before Safrina called for them. As if she knew where they were. They were soon on the road to one of Haiti's best beaches. Jean and Safrina were seated up front and took the time to explain to Premier the latest changes and additions made to the south of Haiti. More Europeans and Asians and Arabs have moved in, buying up acres of land. At least half of them plan to build condos and resorts. Safrina said, "A few recruiters have contacted me about jobs there." "You thinking about taking the gig?" "I don't know. If the pay is right, I guess. They typically don't stay long in the area. Construction has slowed on some of the developments as it is. So if I do take a gig, it might end up being temporary. That's why I make sure to get at least half of my salary up front." Premier was a little confused. "Wait, you can do that?" "I can't," Safrina replied, with a little bit of cockiness in her tone. "What's slowing them down on the construction? Why invest time and money just to leave?" The couple locked eyes for a beat, then answer in unison. "Gangs. Politics." The reply was rehearsed. He got the feeling there was more. He would file that away for a later debate. He was more focused on scouting locations at that moment. They drove up to the peak of a mountain road. Premier was impressed by the hilly landscape and thought his model would fit right in. As the Jeep drove on, he snapped a few shots for consideration. They later came to a beachside bazaar near the shore. Merchants displayed foodstuffs, handmade leather goods, handmade cultural art. "Hey, Premier, you mind if we stop here for a while?" asked Safrina. "There are a few ingredients I need for dinner tonight." "I don't mind at all." He didn't mind. The view was fantastic. The colors were vibrant and seemed to dance in the hazy heat of the sun. Deep blue ocean, cloudy white sky, red and blue and yellow and green boats bobbing up and down frosted creme-topped ocean waves. Peppered about the golden brown sand and the deep blue ocean were radiant bodies in varying shades of brown. A picturesque scene, as breathtaking as it was. It was an almost typical scene on an island like this. He wanted to capture something different. He removed the lens cover and thought he'd snap a few shots anyway. No sooner did he finish the previous thought did a dusky, slender silhouette seem to almost float through the bright colors. He looked up from his camera to eye it, but lost it in the crowd. He looked through the lens again, and this time zoomed in. There it was. There she was. A dark-skinned woman with luminous reddish undertones. Her skin reminded him of a plum or a dark cherry. She was dressed head down in black, holding a black fishnet shoulder bag with bright-colored fruits and vegetables inside. The juxtaposition of her dark skin and her dark apparel with the vibrant groceries stimulated his artistic eye. He needed the shot. He took the shot and moved closer. Looking up from his camera, he could see she was closer now, but she was still a distance away. But he could see she wore long dark locks with burgundy tips. He imagined they were lightened in the sun, with maybe a little help from lemons and black cherry juice. Several locks were decorated with cowrie shells, tiny beads or crystals. He moved closer and snapped more shots. Looking through his lens once more, he zoomed in. The maximum zoom the lens would allow. Just then, as if on cue, she turned to him and faced the camera, dead on. He froze. Her eyes were big, upturned and bright, like a cat's, full of energy, though her eyelids were lowered halfway, bedroom eyes. A smirk on her lips. She held the expression and Premier pressed the shutter button to forever capture the moment. He lowered his camera. Only then did he realize how obvious he was to her. He was not as far as he was when he spotted her last. He was close enough to be noticed then. Also, the space between them was clear. No one, nor no thing between them. So she decided to close that space and introduce herself. "Hi there, Mr. Photographer." Her voice was as sultry as the Caribbean, as sultry as the expression she wore. It was soulful, whispery and raspy, like a dreamy jazz singer in a smoky nightclub. "Hello?" He was momentarily at a loss for words. He found himself smiling awkwardly at her, locked into her gaze. He saw her truly then. Her large and deep brandy-brown eyes popped with energy, surrounded by mascara and black eyeshadow, eyes made more cat-like by the small curved points painted in black mascara to either side of her face. Her mouth was small, but her lips were full, plump and colored a pearlescent plum. Her button nose pierced and adorned with a black pearled stud and black septum ring. She's really into the color black. "Did you get a good shot?" He was snapped out of the charm. "Mostly. Yeah, I think so. Won't really know until I take a closer look at them." He felt bashful, a feeling he hadn't felt for a while, especially in the company of beautiful women. In the past 10 years, he'd shot with many beautiful women, high-profile models and influencers from around the world. A few of them he was charming enough to have bedded and even dated. It was almost strange then, how flustered he became around the dusky woman. She moved even closer to him. "Can I see?" She pointed her lips at the camera in the way West Indians were wont to do. "Sure, yeah, let me show you." He held the camera between them and activated the gallery viewing function. The camera's LCD screen lit up the display with her face. She quickly took hold of the camera. Its strap looped around his neck. As she closed the final few inches between them, they stood shoulder to shoulder. More precisely, her shoulder to his chest, her left ear to his chin. Lasciviously, he regarded how perfect her position to him was, how he could sneak a peek at both her chest and her ass from his vantage point. "Prem, you dirty dog." He took in her scent. She smelled of citrus, honey, and vetiver with a light, nutty shea butter undertone. He blinked in surprise. It was almost all the scents he loved, all in one place. It was all he could do to control himself, as he found that he was growing powerfully aroused by her presence. "Wow, how many did you take?" she said in a tone that suggested she didn't really mind. She swiped right on the camera's touch screen, stopped for a beat or two to take in each image. Her fingernails painted a dark plum, almost black. Discreetly, Premier stole another opportunity to take in more of her figure as they were so close to one another. She was quite petite and slim, yet very shapely at the chest and hips and not shy about her body at all. Damn, how is she shaped like a comic book character? She wore a long, loose-knit, sheer black linen blouse that was, almost ironically, buttoned all the way up to her neck, a black bikini top worn underneath, for the sake of modesty, he presumed. Her cleavage pressed tightly against the blouse. The shirt dress was long, stopping at her knees, matched with a pair of cheeky, solid black low-rise short shorts, a black bikini bottom. The strings were visible on her hip line, and black leather sandals on her feet. Her toes were painted a dark plum, almost black. Images of her, in full undress, danced about his mind's eye. "These are so dope," she said, swiping through photos of the car ride earlier that day, snapping him back to the reality. "Thanks." He was a bit off-put by her minor invasion into his privacy, though it wasn't lost on him that he had no earlier than a few minutes ago invaded her own privacy. She returned his camera to him. "Okay, you can keep them."
"What?" Truly, he was perplexed.
"Well, I was going to delete the photos you took of me, but since you took some really nice shots, you can keep them." Thanks," he said, not sure how to respond. When it came to photography, he was used to asking forgiveness, not permission. He had to remember he was in a different country and a different culture, though that culture was his own. It was a very strange sensation for him, to be simultaneously of a culture yet foreign to it all the same. "Naturally, you're going to send me copies." She winked. "Naturally," he replied as he reached into his camera bag for a business card. As he handed it to her, he said, "Here, write your email address on the back. My name is Premier, by the way." Not offering her name, she gave him a puzzled look. "You're old school, I can appreciate that." She pocketed the card. Then she reached into Premier's front pocket and pulled out his cell phone. The motion was quick and smooth. He didn't have time to register what she had done until after she had done it. "Whoa, what are you doing?" "It's okay, you can trust her." The thought tickled the back of his mind. "Unlock your phone so I can give you my number." Her eyes were locked with his. In those large, upturned eyes, she projected kindness and promise. Promise of adventure. The kind of summer vacation adventure one reminisces on for the rest of their lives. The kind that even married men and women keep from their spouses, as it might irrevocably dent the confidence of their relationship. The kind of adventure that might be filled with long, sensual nights on the beach. The kind of adventure one regrets not taking. And so he unlocked the phone as she commanded. Without instruction, she added her contact information and sent his contact to her device. As she handed back the phone, she asked, "How long are you in Haiti?" "How do you figure I'm not a local?" "You're not. So how long?" She smirked. He smiled. "A few weeks, maybe more." He mentally extending his stay in that moment. "Great. Well, I've got a little more shopping to do, so I should get back to that. I'll text you." And with that she winked and walked away. He lasciviously watched her hips as she did so. Her long, thick locks swayed to either side. The motion lulled him. He had almost forgotten why he was on that beach, why he was holding a camera, why he'd come to Haiti. And then she was gone. He wasn't very talkative after the encounter. "What's wrong with you?" his cousin asked. Premier only shook his head and smirked. Something he did when he was in deep thought. His cousin backed off for the moment. The trio drove to a few more locations, and he took sample shots to debate and decide with the client he would meet up with the next day. On the car ride home, however, he was dead silent. All he could think about was the dusky woman in black. He pulled out his phone, as he had done 6 times since she'd handed it back to him, and stared at her contact info. He added the photo he took of her to the contact info, Lily. He read the name to himself. As he regarded her photo over and over, he remembered the sweet, earthy scent of her citrus honey vetiver bouquet. Lily, as he thought of tasting her lips. Lily, again, as he lustfully imagined her ombre-colored locks, twined between the digits of his fists. Lily, her name became a lascivious mantra. Just then, the phone buzzed in his hands. A notification dropped down from the top of the screen. "Lily. Hey." He froze. It was as if he had willed the text from the dusky woman to appear, and so it had. But now he wasn't sure what to say. His creativity arrested. With no action from him, the notification slid up and off the screen where it had come. He quickly opened the text messaging app and replied. Premier. "Hey, Lily. What are you up to?" Premier. "With the family. On our way home." Lily. "Really? Was hoping you were still in town." Again he froze, but only for a beat. He was not accustomed to such forwardness from a woman he'd met only hours earlier. He wasn't the kind of guy who had frequent transitory trysts. Though taken aback, he welcomed it. It was almost a relief not to have to finesse her. He was admittedly drawn to her then. All of him. Mind, soul, body. There was a knowing sense that he could be himself with her, and so he minced no words and made his intentions perfectly clear. Premier. I can be back by you within an hour. What did you have in mind? Lily. A few beats passed, and then a photo appeared in their conversation thread. A pair of long legs matching her complexion about calf deep in a sparkling clear pool of water. Sitting beside the pair of legs was a plate of fresh fruit, sliced mango, kiwi, strawberries, dragon fruit, and half a bottle of wine wet with condensation. A half-empty bottle of chilled wine. She must be super tipsy. That explains her boldness. The latter thought put him at pause. He didn't want to take advantage of her in an inebriated state, but he also did not want to curb her advances. That would be rude, he thought. She could innocently just want to hang out and not drink alone. It's not an invitation to sex, he lied to himself. He began to reply to her when another ellipsis appeared, indicating that Lily was preparing to send another message. Lily. He waited as she composed her text message. A live video request appeared in its place. It pinged longingly as he frantically searched his camera bag for his wireless headphones. He almost heard her calling to him in his mind as the live video invite pinged desperately for him to answer. Joan and Safrina looked back at him in confusion. He smiled and waved them off. Just looking for my headphones, I'm on a call. His cousin smirked knowingly and whispered, By the way, when we get back to the house, there is something I really need to talk to you about. Sure thing, cousin, he replied to while slipping in the headphones. He tapped his finger on Lily's live video request to initiate the video conference. Took you long enough, she'd said with a smirk. Almost gave up on you. Her eyes were half closed. Her eyelids were heavy with mascara, black eyeshadow, and lust. The sex in her eyes communicated to Premier the exact mood she was in. He resolved to waste no further time. I'm on my way, he proclaimed. Just like that, she begged mockingly, and just like that. What about your family? Oh, right. He looked at the camera awkwardly, realizing how overzealous he must have seemed to her. From the screen she smiled at him, then made a silly face, then stuck out her tongue. He assumed she sensed his awkwardness and decided to put him at ease. He decided it was endearing and warmed up to her, even if just an iota. On a level that was deeper than physical attraction, he desired to know her and the world she lived in. What I meant to say was, after we get to my cousin's house and after the family and I have dinner, I'll be on my way. Okay, she beamed at him through the phone. Her dusky face was flushed cherry red, eyes smoky and low. They stared at each other for a few beats, both silently agreeing not to end the chat so soon. I guess now I can deliver those pics personally, he finally said, and maybe take a few more. Her voice permeated with innuendo as she said the words, and tilted the camera down so that Premier was gifted with a brief glimpse of her bikini. She was still wearing the one he met her in hours earlier, only he could actually see the rest of the bottom half. With the camera tilted back up to her face, they locked eyes. He bit his lip to keep his manhood in check. He was still with Jean and Safrina. He didn't want to embarrass himself. See you soon, Prem. Nicknamed already. The last part of the sentence she moaned in her Creole accent before she ended the video chat. Premier gripped both headrests and leaned forward in his seat and spoke evenly into his cousin's ear. Cousin, after dinner, I'm going to need to borrow that bike. Back at the house after dinner was served, devoured, and now partially digested, his cousin handed Premier his helmet. The helmet does not budge when Premier grabs it. His cousin had a firm hold on it. I need to talk to you first. How long are you planning to stay out? Not sure. Premier was never the type to kiss and tell. I might be back tonight, might be back in the morning. He's married, but he should still know what that means. Definitely before tomorrow evening. I have a meeting with my client then. Wait, why am I explaining myself to my cousin? What is he so worried about? I'll be okay, Dad, he mocked. They both chuckled. His cousin finally released the helmet, but held on to his serious tone. Look, I don't know how much you remember about life around here. You left when you were a little kid. You've probably seen my pics on my profile. But you've never really lived here, not since you were a kid. Much has changed in the last 15, 20 years, but there are some things about this island that have not changed and will never change. I don't know how much you still believe, or if you believe, but people here still believe. To them it is very real. He trails off, not sure how to continue. He saw how difficult a time John was having with his thoughts, and had an idea then what his cousin was trying to say. Relax, cousin. I'm not going to say I believe in that voodoo stuff, but I know not to play around with it. I know it's life and death for some people. To them, it's even more real than you or me. Besides, I can handle myself, and I know when I shouldn't be somewhere." Cousin relaxed. "Okay, cousin, just be extra careful. I know you're a big boy now." They chuckle once more. "But there's some weird stuff going on these days. Weirder than usual. Be extra careful. And if you need me, call me." "Sure thing." Premier mounted the bike. "See you soon." He started up the 2-cylinder engine and rode off into the jungle.